Good morning. How are y'all doing? Is that on? I guess it is. Good. No, I don't normally sound like this. I have a little bit of a raspy throat today, so but I'm feeling a lot better. Anyway, so if you greet me afterwards, just stay a little bit away from me, okay? I don't want you to catch anything from me. But anyway, it's great to hear. I'm delighted to see so many here this morning to hear Margaret speak about basics of human trafficking. And I know it's Valentine's Day, which is the weirdest day of the year to talk about this. But you know, it's an important topic that needs to be talked about at whatever time of year it is. And as Julie Brookbank said, she said, you know, we have to, when we were discussing this issue of talking about human trafficking on Valentine's Day, she said, you know, the fact is some people can't be with their loved ones, even on Valentine's Day. And so we need to talk about it on whatever day of the year it is. So it's great to have you here, and I'm really delighted to have Margaret here. Margaret, I don't know if you know, my younger sister is named Margaret as well. So did you know what Margaret means in Greek? See, I've got to always play.
Precious pearl.
Margaretes is a pearl in Greek. That's right. Very good. Very good. So Margaret is from Wagner, South Dakota, and she's the community navigator at Call to Freedom, where she helps to build communities across the state to address human trafficking. Margaret's passion for helping individuals with experience in human trafficking began when she was in college at the University of Minnesota, and she took a service learning project with a very, very cool professor. Some professors are really cool, and some police professors are like super cool, and so I'm one of the super cool ones, in case you wanted to know. Not, but at any rate, she was with a great professor that was really inspired her on a lot of levels, and she did a human service project, a service learning project. I just want to stop and say, service learning can change your life. Margaret's an example, right? So she did a service learning project where she had the opportunity to coordinate activities at Heartland's Girls Ranch at their program geared toward helping adolescent girls who are formerly involved in sex trafficking. Working with the young women there inspired her to pursue a career walking alongside those in recovery. So she's excited to be back in her home state of South Dakota and to be a part of the organization called to Freedom, and she is their community navigator. So please help me welcome Margaret Doom to the campus of Dakota Wesleyan. Thank you, Margaret.
All right. Do I have to use this? Can you guys hear me if I don't use that? All right, cool. Okay, I don't have my clicker here, so I'm going to have to kind of stay around the podium. So yes, my name is Margaret Doom. I currently reside in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where I work with Call to Freedom. We are an organization that serves people who have experience with human trafficking. We have, gosh, I'm trying to think of how big our caseload is now. I think we have about 200 people on our caseload at this time. We work with both labor trafficking and sex trafficking, and then we also do some work with sexual exploitation as well. And we're going to dive into a little bit more about what those different definitions are. I'm super duper excited to be with you guys here on Valentine's Day. What luck! You know, honestly, this is a topic that it is relevant to love, because it's a topic where an industry where we see a lot of distortion of the idea of what love is. So we talk a lot about trauma bonding and unhealthy relationships being part of the grooming process to bring people into sex trafficking, bring people into human trafficking, and it's something that's abused on a wide scale level by human traffickers across the board. So even though it's not the most fun topic to talk about today, it is super relevant to the experience of people dealing with healthy relationships and being able to navigate a world where a lot of our interactions are happening online. And that online presence gives us a vulnerability to human trafficking, even if we don't have any pre-existing risk factors for it, which we're going to get into a little bit more today. Also, if you guys have any questions as we go, please raise your hand. I would love to answer questions. I'll give you some time to do it at the end too, but I certainly don't mind if you want me to clarify something. I really enjoy to run these more like a conversation. If there is stuff that I can, if you guys have special interest in any one of these topics, I really want to dig into them more, because I want this to be relevant for your experience and your interests. So feel free to kind of shout out at me. I'd love to answer some of those questions. So today we have a few objectives we're going to try to cover. We want to define human trafficking and understand the different industries, understand the prevalence statewide, nationwide. identify vulnerabilities that exist for people, familiarize you with the grooming process, understand the role of sextortion and sex trafficking, which is something that the FBI just recently declared to be kind of like a national emergency, and then learn what resources are available to victims of sex trafficking and human trafficking, because it is really important that we start to educate people, not only who are in human trafficking about it and about what the resources are, but also people who are out of it, because we've learned that 43% of people who are involved in human trafficking, whether that be labor or sex trafficking, actually get out because a friend or family member educated them about what human trafficking is and that there is help for people out there. Most of them don't know. And most of those people are not being brought out of human trafficking by people like me who work in a professional industry. They're being brought out by people like you, who are their relatives, who are their friends, and are who people who love and care about them. So it is really important to be informed, because your role in this process is key. Okay, so I'm going to start with a video, which is admittedly a little intense. So, just as a warning, this is someone's personal story about human trafficking. They are someone who's been involved with Call to Freedom. And hopefully, where's the IT guy? Did he leave? Hopefully the sound works.
My mom would always bring these different guys home at night, and she would call me into a room, and she's like, "Don't worry, they're not going to do anything to you, they're just going to play a game with you." And I was like, okay. I think I was probably about between 6 and 7, and it was known as a tickle game. To me, it was tickling. I didn't know the difference. But then, they'll start touching parts of me. She wanted to in her life, but she couldn't settle on one. So it's a different guy every night. And she didn't see anything wrong with them touching me or being with me. I mean, one rape incident, I walked into the bathroom afterwards and I told her what had happened. And her comment was, "Well, now you're just like me." As a child, you get out of school, you walk home, it's like, okay, who's going to be in my house now? She would work during the day, and then at night, she would go bar hopper. People I'd never met before, I was like, where'd you come from? Who are you? What my mom got out of this, I really don't know. Because to this day, she won't admit that it happened. Don't tell, it'll be our little secret. As a child, you feed into that kind of stuff. Don't tell, get you surprised. Don't tell nobody your toy. I think that people just saw the signs more in me. The more withdrawn, the more I didn't care, the more I isolated myself. I mean, my grades went down. I would find any excuse to stay away from home. I would beg my friends, "Can I come stay with you? Can you please let me come stay the night with you?" Just because I didn't want to go home and not knowing which guy's coming home tonight. What was she going to do tonight with him? He finally stopped when I was in her care, and I went to school, and a boy at school had touched me, and I blew up at him. And then they took me to the counter, and I finally just broke down. I couldn't take it anymore. I was being too many different people. They gave her the option of either removing me or giving me to a family member. When I came to live with my grandmother, it's just like, Grandma said, "I don't want to know." We don't talk about the past as a family. But yet I knew there's something that I needed to take care of, there's something in me that needed help. Finding out more now about everything that I've gone through is I realized that I went into a different personality. I'm working through the problems and what's going on in my life. Even like the other day, I was walking to the bus stop and this guy asked to sit next to me, and as soon as he sat next to me, I just feel the hot sweat, oh my gosh, he's going to touch, he's going to do something, he's going to grab me. I have very bad trust issues. I'm very insecure. Even with my body, it's like, makes you feel dirty all the time. I've had come a long way. Good days and bad days. I started college in the fall, get a business major, and probably I want to own my own hair salon. I want parents to understand that, not everybody's a safe person, not everybody's a toxic person, but look for the signs. They're there.
Okay, so one of the reasons that we like to lead with one of our videos and testimonial from a survivor is that it is very important in all aspects of our work that it is survivor-led, that we are getting information from the people who have been affected by this and using that information to tailor our service to be actually helpful. You know, we're not out there to say, you know, well, we have this study, we have this, and so we're going to do this to you. That is not the process of helping survivors come out of human trafficking. The process is actually to give them back control of their lives, to let them make the decisions and to let them influence and say, hey, this is what I need right now, and here's how you can help me. And that's kind of our role as Call to Freedom. We're going to talk about that a little more later in the presentation. So it's really important to understand that survivors need to be given the voice to speak, and they need to be given encouragement to tell their stories. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the definition to start off with, just so that we're all on the same page. So human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. So the most important part of this definition is force, fraud, and coercion. Okay, Oop, too fast. I got excited. Okay, so force, fraud, and coercion are the tenets that have to be met in a case of adult human trafficking in order for it to be prosecuted by the state. So force might include beatings, rapes, being forcibly held against their will, chains, things that we may often think about when we consider human trafficking. It's going to be the most, that kind of very insidious, violent type of human trafficking that many of us can picture in our heads. But then there's also going to be fraud. So fraud is something that we see really, really commonly. I want to say most of the cases I've come in contact with have had at least some aspect of fraud within them. So fraud doesn't just mean that you're involving money or you're involving, you know, that can kind of be what we think about when we characterize fraud in our head. But fraud is also giving someone a false offer of a relationship. So you may be exactly who you say you are, trying to get in a relationship with someone you met online, but your intentions are not what you say they are. So say someone comes out and meets somebody online and says, hey, I think you're so beautiful, I want to be your boyfriend or I want to be your girlfriend, I just think you're really amazing. And you start a relationship with that person, but the intention is to groom them, to gain their trust, so that then you can exploit them for your own purposes. So that would be an example of fraud. Another example would be in instances of labor trafficking. We'll see a lot of offers of false employment. So someone may say, hey, you know, come work for me, I'm going to take you to America, I'm going to get you a work visa, and I'm going to pay you this much, and you're going to have this house, and this is the life that you're going to lead. And then once they get here, the coin gets flipped and everything changes. And they may take their documents and say, well, you're here now, and even though this is not what you expected it to be, you can't leave. Okay, so those are all going to be different examples of fraud. And then coercion, so bribery or offering something in exchange like food, shelter, different things. Survival sex can fall into that coercion piece a lot of times, which is just having your basic needs met, like having sex with someone or working for someone just to have your basic needs met. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. One of the most important things that I can say today is that in force, fraud, and coercion, those all have to be present in adult trafficking cases. They do not need to be present in the event that it is a minor. Because minors do not have the ability to consent in these situations, you don't have to have force, fraud, or coercion because they can't even say yes in the first place, especially when it comes to sex trafficking. They don't have the ability to consent. You know, so for example, there's no such thing as a child prostitute because they just literally cannot. Okay, and so that's something to really remember when you're prosecuting sex trafficking cases, especially that tenet doesn't have to be met. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the different industries within trafficking so that you guys have some familiarity with what this looks like. So we're going to have survival sex, which I talked a little bit about earlier. So again, just exchanging your basic needs in order to continue to stay alive and continue to have a sense of well-being. This is really, really common in homeless and runaway youth. So that's where we're going to see some of the largest amounts of survival sex. Pornography industry. Escort services, child solicitation, hotel or motel trafficking, and then exchanging videos and photos. So all of those are going to fall under the guise of sex trafficking. So we also have labor trafficking, so housekeeping or nannies. Factories and meatpacking plants can oftentimes fall in this. A lot of agricultural work, specifically in this region. There's a lot of labor trafficking within, dairies is an example of an industry that we see some of that. Egg farms. Those are all areas where that might be present. Food service, it can be present. Beekeeping, it's another big one. And then construction or landscaping. So something to remember about, we have these two different industries and we do characterize them different as labor and then sex trafficking. However, there can be intersections between the two. And so just because someone's labor trafficked doesn't mean that they're also not being sex trafficked. A lot of times we're going to see a high level of overlap between the two industries. Okay. Sexual exploitation and trafficking in the youth, and this is also in adults as well. But we have pimp-controlled trafficking, so this is when you have a designated trafficker who is in control of the situation, who's going to be referred to as a pimp. You've probably heard that term before. This person may be unrelated to them, but they also may be related to them. If they are related to them, it's going to fall a little bit more into this familial trafficking piece here. So that could be a mother, a father, an uncle, an auntie. It can also be someone that the child just perceives to be a relative. So if they refer to them as an uncle or an auntie, they're perceiving them to be a relative, and we still consider that to be familial trafficking. Gang-controlled trafficking. This is the one that a lot of people seem to be very surprised that we have here in South Dakota, but it is very, very relevant. We deal with a lot of gang trafficking cases. We have come in contact with people who have claimed to be trafficked by the cartel in the area. And so this is genuinely something to consider, even though it seems like maybe it's happening far away. It is very present in our own communities. They often have overlap with drug trafficking and can use the same networks in order to traffic both drugs and people. And then buyer-perpetrated trafficking. So buyer-perpetrated trafficking is going to be when there's no middleman, so there's not a pimp involved. It's going to be a lot of those survival sex situations are going to have buyer-perpetrated trafficking because it's going to be a person exchanging, maybe staying at their home for sex or labor, and so there's no middleman in that piece. Okay, so to kind of get an idea of what the scope of this looks like, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the statistics. Now, I want to put out a big disclaimer, specifically because we're in a college campus and we really care about accurate statistics here, I'm sure. I can see all of you are like, yes, don't feed me bad statistics. I'm too smart for that. And I'm totally on the same page with you. Now, when we talk about human trafficking, this is an industry that it really only hit kind of like the big time where people started talking about it in the early 2000s. That's when it kind of blew up and people started to have some awareness that this was going on, okay? Now, it had been going on for hundreds of thousands of years, but that's when we started to pay attention to it as a social issue. So what that means for us is that there isn't a lot of research out there to help us understand the extent of what we're dealing with. On top of that, the short duration that we've really been digging into this problem, on top of that, it is very, very difficult to get data from people who are unwilling to report. Now, human trafficking is one of those industries where it can be very, very difficult to get people to want to disclose what has happened to them, to get people to want to, talk about the full extent or give names or, what have you. And so it can be really difficult to create statistics on this. On top of this, you're going to see that the amount of people we suspect to get out versus the amount of people who are in it is almost infinitesimal. And so the people that we're actually getting to interact with is like the tip of the iceberg compared to all of the people that are involved in this industry. So very important to keep that all in mind, that these statistics are the best we have, and we certainly hope, especially as far as Call to Freedom goes, we're really actively working to compile statistics about demographics, about who these people are, how they were targeted, what were their histories of abuse before they were brought into human trafficking, okay? Okay, so it is considered to be the second largest criminal industry in the world, right behind drug trafficking. There's approximately 40 million people involved. Again, this is a pretty big estimate because we have no idea. You can't just go out and survey everybody who is in modern day slavery, right? We suspect that 1 to 3% of victims are identified. And then 80 to 88% connect with healthcare organizations at some point during their trafficking. So is anybody here going into the healthcare field or want to work in a hospital as a social worker? Well, it was worth a try. That's okay. Well, go and tell all of your nursing friends, your people who want to be social workers, who want to work in hospitals, that it's a key It's a key place for people who are involved in human trafficking to touch base with somebody and to get education about what services might be offered to them, because it might be the only time that they really come in contact with the outside world is when they have infections, broken bones, things like that cannot go ignored anymore. And so we're going to see a lot of them connecting with people outside of trafficking in the emergency department is a huge place where that comes through, but then also in psychologically and psychiatric departments, because we see a lot of mental illness and a lot of I'm trying to think of a word and it's not coming to me, where you're going to see both at the same time, okay? All right, so this is a little snapshot of what trafficking looks like in South Dakota. So you're going to see that intimate partner trafficking is huge. That's going to be the biggest part at 58%. We're going to see unknown, so those are people who either choose not to report, maybe they just haven't disclosed their entire story to us at this time when these statistics were taken. There's a lot of stuff that can go into that. Perhaps they're mentally ill and we're just not 100% sure what the story is. And then you can see that family member is also a really large chunk of this at 13%. And then acquaintance or gang and dating or groomed into human trafficking. So does anyone have any questions so far? I'm going to stop, and that means I'm covering the material really well, right? Okay, good. So, this can be really eye-opening for people because a lot of us don't think about the fact that we may get involved in a relationship and that relationship could end up in a trafficking situation. But people marrying their trafficker, people considering their trafficker to be a boyfriend or girlfriend is very, very common. And that's why we also don't get a lot of self-identification, because even though someone is trafficked, it doesn't mean that they understand that's the situation that they're in. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is, psychologically speaking. Emotional and psychological manipulation is the second most used tactic to bring somebody into trafficking. And so that's a good thing to remember when we're talking about statistics as well, is do people self-classify? Even if the law itself would classify them as a trafficking victim, that doesn't necessarily mean that the person sees themselves that way. And that is really, really important, because people are not going to self-report or ask for services if they themselves feel like they have a say in it. And we'll talk a little bit more, and if you guys have any questions about that, we can certainly cover that at the end too, because it's a very complicated thing to understand. Just unknown what the relation to the trafficker is. Does that make sense? So they may not understand, we don't know who that person is to them. And there can be a lot of reasons that we don't know. One of them would be, we have sometimes we'll have people come in and we can't tell what is reality and what might be an episode of schizophrenia, what might be drug induced. There's some, there's going to be some wiggle room in there where we're not 100% sure what the story is, but we know they need help.
So the numbers on the last slide are based on your experience?
Yes, these are call to freedom numbers. Correct. All right. So, we're still kind of waiting to get the final numbers for 2021 to publish our statistics for that and how many people we served. But we served 177 new clients in 2020 alone, and then 170 plus new clients since January of 2021. So we'll be hopefully putting out an annual report here relatively soon that you guys can take a look and see what our numbers look like for last year and kind of get more of a statistical idea of what we're dealing with. 98% of our clients were female, 41% were Native American, 40% Caucasian, 4% African American, 3% Latino, and 12% multiracial. 75% of the people that we encountered were in the sex trafficking industry, 10% labor trafficking, 7% both labor and sex, and 8% exploitation. So just to break down these statistics and talk into this a little bit, it is really important. Just because we are seeing more women at Call to Freedom does not mean that there isn't a really, really large male population out there. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons that male survivors might not self-identify. What do you guys think? What's a reason a male survivor may not self-identify? Yes, exactly.
They lose their income.
They may lose their income, for sure. I know "Leave Me Alone" sweatshirt, you had something.
I had something and then it just...
You're sending the wrong vibe with that sweatshirt. I'm like,
really
about to call you out, and I'm like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't. She's not feeling it today. Shame, for sure. There's a lot of stigma that comes along with being a man and feeling like you were taken advantage of. Oftentimes men don't feel like, it's the same issue that we see with rape. Men may not perceive that they've been raped, even though they were unwilling participants. That because of the way that culture looks at sex and the way that culture understands men's role in sex, they may not believe them. And that's something that is pretty powerfully ingrained in a lot of male survivors. And so it's not uncommon that they're not going to come forward and look for services or self-identify because of that. Okay? And so this doesn't at all mean that there's not an incredibly large male population out there. It just means that they may not be coming forward with near the numbers that the females are. The other thing is that even as Call to Freedom, we've taken a look at our own materials and realized, like, hey, you know, when we look at our pull tab posters, which are posters that people can grab our number and like stick it in their shoe to call us for help at some point, they're all women. And so even the images that we throw out as providers are going to affect people's ability to self-identify. And so it's really important that as you guys go out and educate all your friends about human trafficking on Valentine's Day, which I just know is going to happen. I'm so excited for all of you. You know, it's important to use gender-inclusive language and to understand that you know, the way that we speak about trafficking even is going to affect how comfortable people feel coming forward, right? So just a little tidbit to keep in mind. The other thing to consider is that we do see really high amounts of people who are bi, gay, the LGBTQI plus 2SP++ community, all are going to be much more vulnerable to this for various different reasons. So we're going to see that. We're going to see people who are part of the trans community are going to be especially vulnerable as well. And so it's really important that when we talk about giving people help, we are as inclusive as possible so that we can get them what they need. Okay, so this is put out by Polaris. So the last one they put out in 2019, so that's why these statistics are a little backdated, so I apologize, but they only do these spotlights like every 3 years, and we find them to be really efficacious. So this is just kind of an idea of what the National Human Trafficking Hotline has come in contact with through their hotline in South Dakota. So you can see there's the phone calls, web forms, emails, the different ways that people have contacted the National Human Trafficking Hotline and reported a case of trafficking. So they've identified 65 victims, okay? That doesn't necessarily mean that these victims came to Call to Freedom either, okay? These may be separate. Call to Freedom is, although we are open and willing to serve whoever in the state needs us, we are technically an East River specific organization, and that's going to be our biggest population. There are more organizations that serve West River. And so this is, you know, it's important to remember that we may not overlap with these numbers at all. So I think that this just kind of gives you an idea of even on a scale outside of our statistics what people are coming in contact with. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about legislation. Okay, we got a half hour left. This is great. I'm just on a roll here. You guys are a great audience. So we're going to talk a little bit about what our legislation looks like here in South Dakota. If you want to go more in depth, do we have anybody who's interested in law here? Do we have anybody who's interested in government? What do you guys do here? I'm just kidding. I'm sure you guys are all doing something really, really important. Okay, so law is really important and a big piece, obviously, in prosecuting traffickers and then also helping victims as well. So there are report cards that you can check out per state that can tell you a little bit about what the human trafficking hotline, Polaris, the Polaris Project considers to be strengths in law and then weaknesses by state. So which states are the most friendly to helping people in human trafficking be, kind of reclaim their lives, which states it's going to be the hardest to kind of get a leg up. Right now, here's a couple of things that we've seen come through. So ensuring traffickers are prosecuted for their crimes. One big piece is that you cannot, in South Dakota, claim that an individual that you thought they were of age. So in an event that a minor is involved in a trafficking situation, the purchaser couldn't say, well, they told me they were 18, or the trafficker told me they were 18. It doesn't matter. If that person is underage, it doesn't matter what you thought they were. And so that's a really big piece of legislation because it makes people have to think about it, and it's going to change the criminal charges based on the statute that it comes in contact with. Paving a path to a clean record. This is really, really important. So for minor victims with convictions of crimes they were forced to commit. So a lot of times when people are involved in trafficking, and this isn't only minors, but this law is specific to them, they are going to be forced to do things because their trafficker asked them to. That might be drug related, selling drugs, taking drugs. It might be crime related. It might be theft related. And so helping people to get a fresh start is really, really important because if they're going to go out and get employment and be able to rebuild their lives, they've got to be able to have those clean records or closed records in order to do that in some cases. So that's something that's a really big piece of sort of like that rehabilitation that they're going to go through. And, it's just true that if they don't see a way out of trafficking, if they say, once I leave, I have no way to make money. I think someone mentioned that earlier. If I have no way to make an income outside of trafficking, why would I leave? And so it adds to that feeling of being trapped in their situation. So increasing access to victim resources, that includes reimbursement of expenses, hospital stays and mental health counseling, and then CPS jurisdiction by categorizing sexual exploitation as a form of abuse. And so that if someone is circulating pictures of a minor, that is also going to be under the CPS jurisdiction. Here's just some of the statutes that we have. I encourage you all to go look them up, get familiar with your state's laws. Even if you're not involved in legislation in any way, it still can be a really eye-opening experience. And I think a lot of you, no matter what your field is, it's important to be a part of South Dakota's process of making legislation because it may affect you in some other ways as well. Okay, now we're going to talk about vulnerabilities. Okay, so there's a lot of three different categories, I guess, and a lot of different vulnerabilities that we want to talk about. The first one we're going to talk about is individual risk factors. Okay, so these are things that may have happened to a person that are going to make them more vulnerable to traffickers. This can be for a couple different reasons. It can be their own psychological state and the way that they perceive relationships and love, but it can also be because a trafficker, they're going to disordinately target people who they perceive to have these vulnerabilities. For example, traffickers actively target people who have been victims of sexual abuse as a minor, because they perceive those people as being less likely to report additional abuse that happens to them if they already feel like the system has failed them. So they're going to be much more vulnerable because traffickers are going to say that's the kind of person we want to target. So just a brief rundown, we're going to see sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, which can take a lot of different forms. We can have physical neglect, emotional neglect, what have you. Homelessness, LGBTQ, we talked about that a little bit. Mental health issues. People, that's I think the fourth biggest vulnerability that people have when traffickers are targeting individuals, and that can be for a lot of reasons. People with unstable mental health, they might have previously been victims of trauma, and that's why they're experiencing mental health, so that's kind of like a comorbid vulnerability. But also, it may be because traffickers believe that people won't believe them if they say that something is going on. Or they may already kind of have a record of being difficult to work with for teachers, and do we have any teachers in here? Well, yeah, you guys. That doesn't count. But they may already have kind of a reputation within that sphere of, not showing up to school, truancy, or being difficult in school, and so it's going to be a little more likely or a little more easy for them to slip through the cracks. So then we're going to have, disability is a big one. Sorry, I want to make sure I touch on that. Disabilities is huge. A lot of people with mental disabilities and physical disabilities are targeted by traffickers, and that is a huge issue that we need to address in our society, the way that we protect those vulnerable individuals. Environmental risk factors, okay? So these are things that are going to happen in and around where an adult or a child is living. So we're going to see substance abuse, poverty, violence, any kind of street-involved economy, so the drug trade, things of that nature. Involvement with or targeted by gangs, so if you live in a gang-dominated neighborhood, like many people do in the cities, if they're in the child welfare system or foster care, because, if you don't have an adult that is specifically keeping eyes on you, if you have, social workers with large caseloads, and they're trying to keep an eye on all these kids, it can be more easy for someone to slip through the cracks or to be targeted. Also, traffickers are going to look at those people as being more vulnerable. So those are all different areas where we're going to find people being targeted by traffickers. We also have some social risk factors, again, that we've touched on before. Racism is a big one. Sexism, homophobia, transphobia, the sex industry, acceptance of violence against women, the idea that this is something that happens, I guess. Glorified pimp culture, consumerism, and then access technology is a really big one that we're seeing creating vulnerability, specifically in young people like yourselves, that's going to be something that needs to be addressed more and more as, sort of the technology race runs on and we're all just trying to catch up. Okay, so I have another really brief video. This is only 4 minutes long, and then we're gonna break this down a little bit and talk about grooming. So grooming is the way that many people, specifically young people, are going to be brought into situations of sex or human trafficking. And so it's really important to be able to identify if you are being groomed, or if someone you know is being groomed, or if your child or if your student is being groomed. This is really important information to know. I think this video also sheds light on the fact that sometimes the people who are the traffickers are people we trust and we allow into our lives or into our children's lives or our family's lives without knowing that they kind of have this insidious thing going on underneath. This video is put on by Goya Cares. Do you guys know Goya, the brand? The taco seasoning? Okay. By Goya, they're great. We're really super happy that they did this video. It's really incredible, and there is a 30-minute long version of this video that's available online that has even more information about what this grooming process is that I encourage you guys to check out after this presentation.
Throughout this series, we'll be following the story of Rachel and the tragic story of how an innocent girl can unseemingly become groomed for trafficking.
Make your own success weak.
Hey, want to skip next period and get food? Okay, you driving? Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Watkins.
Hey.
Hi, class. We have a special guest for you today.
Traffickers and abusers are always lurking, so don't for a second think that just because there are other trusted adults in the room or the area that they still can't try to get at you.
Class, Principal Miller has a guest for us today.
Yes, this is Brian. He is an entrepreneur. He's a techie, an app developer.
He's actually not. He's posing as one, and this is all an act, and unfortunately, he's really good at it.
Nice. Brian, welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and we're thinking of having him be our keynote speaker for our fundraiser.
Nice. Well, Brian, any words of wisdom for the class? Oh, you know what? This class is actually filled with a lot of young coders and techie proteges. Rachel over here has developed her own app. I have a beta version of it right here on my pad. And Kim gets credit for the name, of course, and Matthew helped redesign the school website.
All it takes is 5 seconds for these predators to read if you're fine for grooming. And one of the very first strategies is being your trust.
Rachel, right? Yes? Hi, I'm Brian. Nice to meet you. Your teacher said that you were making some apps. Have you got any internships yet?
Oh, I wish. My parents want me to go into the family business. They're not really that into coding. They just think it's a bunch of gimmicks.
Traffickers and abusers are constantly scanning their victims, looking for any sort of vulnerabilities to use against them.
And, they're going through a really great divorce right now. They never really listen to me, but...
So be very careful who you're sharing your private and sensitive information with. They're experts at manipulation.
Sorry, TMI.
That's not fair to you. I am working for this big startup. I can put in a good word for you.
Oh my God, seriously?
They let me scout from T-Town. So it's this new big tech thing. It actually works on facial recognition. It's really cool. Let me show you. I'll take a photo. Sorry, server's down.
Now, predators strive to be the sole provider of something that the victim could want or need. It could be as simple as something like shoes, money to take care of bills, something to eat, maybe an expensive outing, or emotional support. Maybe a ride home from a party, and most commonly, a cell phone.
What's your social? I'll add you.
I'm not on anything. My parents are super strict, and they pay the phone bills, so they see everything I do on it.
They will try and relate and show empathy.
Tech protege, non-social. I get it, I have strict parents. But you need to be on there. So you gotta make your own path in life. That's how I got started. You know what? This is crazy, but here. They wouldn't take it back anyway. It's my old work phone. It's yours.
They will almost immediately try to create separation from you and others.
I'm still logged in. Download whatever you need. Just don't tell your parents. You don't want them killed in the tree. Just consider an investment. It's yours.
King case?
Yeah, she's my nieces. I just put it on my graphic.
Mentors or adults that play a role in a child's life outside the home are better positioned than most abusers because unlike others, they have the ability to mold their victims in the way that they see fit, already being an authority figure. Remember, grooming doesn't happen all at once. This is by design, and all they care about is planting the seed. Then they will wait to strike at the right opportunity. In this situation, the seed was on his phone, just waiting for it to be planted.
Awesome. So you guys can watch that with your Valentine's dates tonight. Yeah, and go see a fun movie. Okay, we're going to really quick go through the grooming process. I know we're running out of time here, so I'll try to keep it brief. This is kind of what it looks like. As you saw in the video, it's a long drawn-out process, and it can take up to 2 years. It can take up to 5 years. It can take 2 weeks. So it's really important to understand who you're getting involved with, whether it's a mentor, whether it's a significant other, whether it's a friend, because all of those people could be potential traffickers. And I don't say that to scare you, but just to help you be aware of the fact that, especially when you're meeting people on Tinder, when you're meeting people on all these different types of dating apps, that you might be creating a vulnerability for yourself, and that it's really important to play it safe. So if you're going out on a date with someone you haven't met before, that people know where you are, that you're going to a public place, and that you're not just trusting them right off the bat, understanding that they may not be who they say they are. So grooming is used to give the victim a sense of dependency on the perpetrator, so that filling a need, gaining trust, and then isolation. So a lot of times if you're in a relationship and you feel like that person is trying to isolate you from your support system, whether that be family or friends, that's a big red flag, not only for trafficking, but also just for unhealthy relationships as well, because it creates a dependency on that person that you may not feel like you can escape. So something to keep in mind. This dependency may look like a lot of different things. It could be a physical dependency or an emotional dependency. We have plenty of people who walk through our doors who, their opening for their trafficker was that they never felt supported by parents, family members. Maybe they were very on their own as kids, and that was all the opening that a trafficker needed to target them. And then traffickers are experts at cognitive manipulation. So they're going to use a process of intermittent praise and degradation in order to create what's called a trauma bond. So a trauma bond is when two people are sort of linked together because of this. It actually creates almost an addictive reaction in the brain when you have that intermittent praise and degradation. This is something we take into the high schools and talk a lot about with our healthy relationships curriculum. When you have relationships that run hot and cold like that, it creates, within a person, it can create the need for that praise. And so when someone degrades somebody else, what they're doing is creating a desire in that person, oh, I'll do whatever it takes to make you happy now, or I'll do whatever it takes to get back in your good graces, because that feeling of, happiness that I get from being loved by you, it's all I want, it's all I crave, because it creates such a release of hormones in your brain. And so they're very, very good at this, and creating these relationships. And so it's super duper important to realize that being able to understand that process within yourself and identify when those unhealthy patterns start, that can help protect you down the road, not only from trafficking, but we see a lot of intersectionality, that was the word I was looking for earlier, intersectionality with trafficking and domestic violence and abuse. All of that can kind of come together. How many of you guys are familiar with the concept of sextortion? All right, yeah, this is awesome. We're getting some nods. So sextortion it's kind of a new thing, and what it is when someone uses someone's online presence or sexual content to sort of extort them, blackmail them into either creating more content, giving them money, or possibly lure them into sex trafficking by blackmailing them into doing more and more heinous things as they go. So sextortion is something that is hitting law enforcement's radar in a big way. I recently did a presentation with Homeland Security, the communications, I'm going to say she's a communications director. Don't quote me, though. I don't think that's her exact title, but she works with communications for the Department of Homeland Security. And she and I had a really great conversation about this. This is a thing we need to be aware of, specifically as young people who might be putting content out onto the internet. And then once it's out there, we may lose control of it. So sextortion is the practice of extorting money or sexual favors from someone by threatening to reveal evidence of their sexual activity. Traffickers posing as potential romantic partners, they can acquire sexually explicit content and then use it to blackmail people. So this is actually one of the biggest targets for this is young men between the ages of 10 and 18. They're being disordinately targeted by this. So they might pose as someone they're not, ask for used nude photos. They may steal your search history and threaten to reveal it to your family or friends. They might sell your nude photos without your consent. So again, photos that were given to them with consent initially, or maybe given to someone else. 78% of sextortion cases involved extorting a child for more sexual content, threatening to edit the face of a child over a sexually explicit photo. And then initial contact with the child involves learning personal information, such as who their friends, family, or school are, and then traffickers will lure that child to an anonymous video platform to actually kind of begin that extortion process. So again, something to be really aware of so that you can protect yourselves. Healthy internet use and having safe internet use is really important. And if you guys, there's lots of different websites out there that can help you understand what it looks like to be online, what are some of the vulnerabilities that you may possess, and how to protect yourself from people who may be looking to do that. Another thing to realize with sexual extortation or sextortion. So in sextortion, they may not even have a picture. They may not even have your search history. A lot of times it's just phishing. And so they're going to say, hey, I have this thing, and if you don't do this, I'm going to expose it. Well, that thing may exist, but they don't really have it. But so many people have that presence on the internet that when they send out those threats, they get a few people who panic about it. I actually had a friend who recently she got a text out of nowhere from a number that she'd never seen before, and they're like, we're going to share your search history if you don't do something. Thank you. You are such a lovely group. So we're going to share your search history if you don't, I can't remember if it was money. I think it was, if you don't send us some money. And she's like, okay, probably baby goats, or she's like, why is that something that I should care about? But there is going to be someone out there who is going to be worried about that, and all of a sudden they've got their hook in them. So these are some signs of Human trafficking, this is not an exhaustive list, and I really encourage you guys to go look up an exhaustive list if it's something you're interested in, but they're oftentimes going to avoid contact. They're going to show signs of malnourishment, fatigue, sleep deprivation, untreated illnesses, or unusual behavior. They have no control of their possessions, money or ID, so if they don't have control of their phone, even if they're worried about checking their phone all the time, or who's looking at their information on their phone might be a red flag. They're going to exhibit evidence of verbal threats or emotional abuse. They might have a new instant love who's like lavishing them with gifts, and you're like, where did you get, these really expensive shoes, or how do you have all of this money or this new car? Well, that can be a symptom of somebody who is trying to lure them in. If they show signs of physical abuse, restraint, or confinement, and then if they have any sort of lack of freedom over their movements. Those can all be big red flags to keep in mind. Tattoos are another one. So a lot of times they will, we see traffickers will brand or tattoo people. So if you see any kind of burns like that, if you see tattoos that are a barcode, or sometimes they can even just kind of look like a weird symbol. There's also a list of like words that you might find in trafficking tattoos. I was recently out to dinner with a friend of mine who did her PA residency in the cities, and she worked in a community health clinic, and something that they would always look for is every time they did an exam of the mouth, asked them to do like the ah, they would always look for a barcode tattooed on the inside of the bottom lip. So all things to consider, that if you notice, it might be a red flag of trafficking. Okay, there's a lot of barriers to identification. We briefly talked on this earlier. All of these are going to play into why people don't come forward and report that they are victims, okay? It's why our statistics are, as we talked earlier, why our statistics are really off. They've got a lot of reasons not to come forward, and one of the biggest ones is believing that there's no help for them after they get out of trafficking, okay? So educating people that there are resources that exist specifically for trafficking victims, and that this is not the end of their lives, that there are people who are willing to help them with whatever legal issues they may be having, if they've committed past crimes or if they're illegal immigrants, that there are ways to address that, that their health needs, that their home needs, that their food needs can all be met, that there are organizations who will help them with that. Educating people on that is really, really important. And then also educating them because they may not understand that they are a victim of human trafficking. So, just helping people to know and understand what it is will help people be able to self-identify. Okay, I promise this is the last slide. Okay, so this just kind of gives you an idea of where you fit in to the ecosystem of helping victims of human trafficking find a better life. Okay, so law enforcement, of course, is going to be a part of the prosecution, part of collecting evidence. They're going to work with SANE nurses, sexual assault nurse examiners, and other parts of law enforcement to create cases against traffickers, so that's a piece. Then you're going to have educators who are going to provide ongoing support and identification to victims. They're also going to assist them in accessing resources or making reports. The judicial system, they're going to prepare cases. They're going to assist victims with any offenses they may have obtained. Then you have victim support specialists like Call to Freedom. So our role is to go in and help them fill all of the life needs they need, whether that's providing occupational therapy, helping them pay for housing, helping them get into treatment facilities, whatever that may look like. And then there's you guys. So communities prevent trafficking by educating those who are vulnerable and helping victims receive information that is going to help them realize that they can rebuild their lives. And so you guys, again, that 48% of victims coming in contact, I'm not sure if that's don't quote me, 40-something% of victims are going to be helped out of trafficking by a friend or family. So just getting educated offers a lot of hope for people out there who are involved in trafficking, who are looking for a better life. This is just kind of a brief overview of all of the services that we offer at Call to Freedom. I'm the community navigator there down on the bottom, but we also have housing navigators, we have on-staff occupational therapists, we have people who work in community outreach, we have emergency addiction service coordinators, case managers, what have you. Every person who walks in our door is going to have a case manager that's going to help put them in contact with all of these different resources that they need to rebuild their lives. And then, of course, if you want to contact us, this is a good way to do it. We do have kind of like an on-call phone. We don't refer to it as a hotline, but for instances where someone is trying to access resources. But if you come in contact and you want to make a tip of human trafficking, also check out the human trafficking hotline. They've got a number that you can call to make tips as well. Okay, we've got 5 minutes. I talked really fast at the end of the presentation there. So maybe you can go back and watch the recording and put it on slow. You know how you can slow down people's voices? So does anyone have any questions for me? Anything that I can elucidate on from this presentation or additional information you guys might want? Yeah.
You just briefly mentioned doing some trainings or some speaking engagements with high schools around South Dakota. Do you do middle schools as well?
Yes. So we go as young as elementary schools. And those programs are basically geared at helping people understand how to have healthy relationships, what their rights are, what consent is. They're very PG rated. A lot of people are like, I don't know if I want sex trafficking information in my school. They're not sure what that means. But we're just there to help kids understand, that they have value, that their bodies are theirs, that they can choose who comes into their space, and how to have healthy relationships in their lives. So yeah, definitely. Please, if that's ever something you're interested in, please let your school board know that you want us there, and then we will travel all over the state to deliver that curriculum in schools. Yes?
I'm curious about state legislation. Are there other policies that need to pass or that would be helpful for this better cause?
Yeah, so I'm going to be honest, if you really want to dig into that, our executive director, Becky Rasmussen, who has been involved in a lot of legislative efforts on behalf of human trafficking victims, is going to be the best person to ask about that. I do know that at this time we'd like to see a lot more legislation regarding people coming out of trafficking having forgiveness of their records or closing their records, especially on the adult side, is something that's really important so that we can help them kind of start their new lives. But there's also, I know, lots of legislation that can just assist in, helping make sure that these cases, I guess it's not legislation, but just making sure that the cases make it all the way through the judicial system and what that process looks like.
Is it hard to prove that someone was a victim of sex trafficking?
Incredibly. We have never had a prosecution in the state of South Dakota. Yeah, that I know of at this time. Yeah.
As far as, I know that some of them end up addicted to drugs that the traffickers do them on. What do you see as far as people going back to the life because of that? Return to
That is an awesome question. Recidivism is a huge problem for multiple reasons. A lot of it is going to be substance abuse, whether that's they had substance abuse before coming into trafficking and then their trafficker holds the access to that drug and they start to go in withdrawals and they're going to go back because those withdrawals are obviously an incredible impetus. But on top of that, traffickers will purposely get people addicted because they know that it institutes an extra level of control. But even just those trauma bonds, unhealthy relationships and those trauma bonds being created and that addiction to the back and forth with their trafficker can be enough to drag people back in. A lot of them may also have children with their trafficker, and so creating those clean-cut ties can be really difficult for them. Or they've got, again, previous records of criminal records that make it very difficult for them to move into a different phase of their life. So yes, recidivism is huge. One of the things that I am the most proud of at Call to Freedom, and that was really brought home to me the first day I opened or walked in the doors, was it does not matter if somebody goes back to the life 20, 22, 25, 30 times. On the 31st time, we are going to be there welcoming them with open arms. Because many of them have never had that. They've never had people who offer that unconditional support. And so we have to be there. The moment that they decide enough is enough and they really, they want to take that next step, we have to be there every step of the way and not hold it against them that they may have fallen back in a number of times. And that's what our role is, and I'm incredibly proud to say that as an organization. Other questions? Cool. Wow, that's great. Okay, so there is actually another presentation going on tonight, so if a question pops up, you can go to that one too. Really pack your Valentine's Day in with human trafficking. Exciting. Thank you guys. You have been so wonderful. I just appreciate it. So.
Thanks, DWC students for coming over. It's great to see so many of you here. Where would we be without you, actually? Thank you for coming. And 7 o'clock, we'll do it again. Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You have lunch plans?
I actually got the pull up at a coffee shop.
That's not.
This was so
I work out